Hey YouTube, it's Artichoke Dip here again, and so I listened, not listened, I read a lot of your comments. I'm new to the live streaming thing, and so I made some preparations and hopefully ironed out some of the kinks um, that, with the view and but the angle of everything. So I hope this is a lot better than it was before, so let's see how this works out. So in this video, I am going to, at that point, be continuing on with Four Against Darkness, level 5 here, and of course the Ravenloft venture module here. So now I'm going to do a quick recap for those of you out there. If you're watching this video and you have not watched the first one, um, Ravenloft is a world that's connected. It can be accessed through the prime material plane in the Dungeons and Dragons setting. And at that point, once anybody that enters into the realm can never escape. So, kind of makes it rather interesting, if you will. So yeah, this ought to be very cool. And let's get underway and let's get started. And before I start this video, if you enjoy my channel and my content, give me a thumbs up. If you have not subscribed, please subscribe and click the little bell icon. And every time I upload a new video, you will be notified. All right. So, quick recap on where we left off. At that point, the adventurers were in the town of Barovia. They had helped, at that point, bury the deceased. I guess we'll just call him the governor, just for the quick catch up on this. Basically, they helped them bury the governor because nobody else in the town wanted to. They did a little bit of investigating and found out that there's something very sinister going on in this town that affects everybody and everything. And now at this point, they have been given information that there's an artifact that could possibly help them open up a portal and get them back to the prime material plane from where they came from. So it's now morning and they are leaving the village of Barovia and headed at that point along a very, very long road to get to their destination point, which is Castle Ravenloft. So let's get started and let's get rolling on this. So it's morning as they head out, and just like the mornings, every morning since they've been here, it's always cold and gray, and the fog is always thick and heavy with mist that seem to, at that point, reach out and grip them, and almost like a strangling type of fog that holds them. And they start out along the road heading towards Castle Ravenloft. It isn't too long before the cobblestone streets give way back to muddy, nasty, wet trails that at that point that they're trying to trudge through, and they're boots are weighed down with moisture and mud, and beyond the trail, out in the very thick rolling clouds of fog, the landscape almost seems to disappear and drift off into a very bleak gray nothingness. So it's about a half hour into their travels, they begin to hear a familiar sound in the background. The sound of wolves howling. As Bolivia disappears behind them in the dense, thick fog and is no longer in sight as to where they can see from the misting, rolling banks of fog. At that point, they see darkened silhouettes that come bursting forth. And at that point, begin to attack them on the trail. Caught off guard, the warrior at that point draws his sword and swings wildly at the first wolf that's the closest to him. Let's see how he does. Now, my wolves at this point are a level 4, and they have 6 hit points. So he has just rolled 12, which is more than enough to kill this wolf at that point. The elf, with his scimitar equipped, swings at this wolf that comes in and tries to flank him from his right side. Rolling a 9, he wounds the wolf very badly, and it cries out in pain and bleeding as it turns away and slinks back into the thick banks of fog. The third wolf at that point leaps at the cleric and tries to tear at the cleric. The cleric, before the wolf at that point can dig its fangs into him, rolls a 9, and just like the elf, badly wounds the wolf but doesn't kill him. But the wolf at that point retreats back into the thick fog banks, and their howls can be heard throughout this unforgiving landscape. It's at this point that the adventurers decide, even during the day hours, that this area is not that safe and they should always have their weapons equipped and ready for anything that may come their way. My elf at that point equips his longbow. The cleric has his mace ready, and at that point my magic user, or my wizard, Zanti, readies a magic missile spell for whichever may come near them. Hmm. After a very, how do we put this, nerve-wracking, what seems like journey through endless fog banks and um, mud and cold, bitter winds that just seem to be relentless on this landscape. At that point, the trail comes to a bridge that crosses over a river. So let's go ahead and add that trail in now. All right. The river Iblis flows as clear as blue winter sky through the valley. So, to their surprise, as they come to the bridge, there is crisp, clean water that flows through in this really, how do we put this, evil, relenting landscape, almost like a break from everything that they have experienced up to this point. My warrior takes watch and watches while the other adventurers take a quick break from their march. The cleric steps down to the riverbank at that point to collect some water and create some holy water. And let's see if we have an encounter. Uh oh. Hmm. So, as the adventurers take a quick break from this long, exhausting hike that hasn't been um, but a few hours, but feels like they've spent a few days out on the trail. From their perspective of what they can see around them in the thick, heavy fog banks, they hear a almost a sound of shuffling in the tall grass. And then from out of the shadows at that point, let me reposition these guys. The horrible putrid smell of rotting flesh at that point makes them retch almost as the silhouettes break past the heavy thick fog into their sight. zombies at that point stare at him through their lifeless eyes, viewing them hungry for fresh human flesh and blood. At that point, the warrior dashes and puts himself in, in between the wizard and the cleric to protect him, and swings at the first zombie he sees. All right. So far, he's been doing very well today, so let's hope this keeps going. Very nice. And that's a 7. So if you guys remember, out of this rule system, which is really cool, this one right here, at this point, anytime you roll a 7 or an 8, the dice actually explodes and you get to roll again and add those results to that. So he's at a 12, and I'm going to roll that again. So now that'll take him up to 17. His two-handed sword, as it cuts swiftly through the thick, foggy air, comes down, just cleaving the zombie in half. And at that point, that zombie is off the board and gone. My elf fires his arrow directly at the zombie that he can see to try to protect the wizard from the horrible walking abomination. Alright. So that'll give him an 11. And the zombies, oh yeah. So at that point, he releases the arrow. It finds its spot. The arrow embeds itself deep into the skull of that zombie. As the zombie freezes momentarily, its eyes rolling in the back of its head, drops to its knees, and slumps at that point to a mound of rotten flesh to the ground. They hear a splashing noise. And out of the river, another zombie comes crawling up on the shore. The cleric, with his mace equipped and ready at this point, the mace of light, goes to smite this evil being. He rolls a 9, which is more than enough to hit the zombie. And as the mace comes down, it crushes the skull of this horrible animated abomination. And putrefied blood and brains just squirt out at that point, and the zombie slumps lifeless back into the river as its body floats slowly away underneath the bridge and out to wherever the river dumps into whatever larger body of water. Now, the thing about Ravenloft is you're cut off from the prime material plane, so at this point he's going to try a prayer and see if he can make holy water, but because he's cut off from his god, it may not work. Welcome to Ravenloft. And I think we're going to use some percentage die for this to at that point. I'm looking at the comments here, and hey Steve, how are you doing? If you're all wondering why I'm doing this so early, so it's getting towards the end of the year, and I got some vacation time to burn out, so I decided to burn a day up, make a long weekend, and make a video. Okay, so I'm going to use my percentage die here, if I don't throw them all over the place. And I'm going to go on a 50% probability. If it's above 50%, at that point, his god can intervene and he can make holy water. If it's below 50%, well, the realm of Ravenloft, the evil is just too strong and resists his god. And, nope, a 0-7. As he offers a prayer to make holy water, it is not answered. All he has is a vial of river water. Yep. It's at that point, they decide to press forward and get out of Dodge before too many more zombies show up looking for a free meal. They begin to cross the bridge, heading closer to Castle Ravenloft, and in the clearing where they're at, they can see in the distance, high upon a mountainous cliff, surrounded underneath dark, swirling gray clouds and lightning, a castle that the towers seem to spiral straight up into the dark, foggy clouds. Alrighty. So, I'm going to have to do some rolls here because for every hex that I pass through, there's a percentage we may meet another encounter. Nope. Nope. Holy cow. Getting off lucky here. This is unlike Ravenloft. I knew it. Alright. So, after the adventurers travel for quite amount of time, skittish and with their weapons equipped, you're waiting for anything that may pop out of the shadows, and the sound of wolves at that point in the distance howling. They go through a large curve in the clearing, and as they come back through the switchback and walking through thick fog banks, let's see what we have here. So, as they move into an area, at that point, the temperature feels like it's dropping more and more, and the tenacity of the cold, bitter, damp air clings to them, and the air almost feels electrified at that point. the hair starts to stand on end on the back of their necks. They feel as if they're being watched. And in the as large gray cloud banks move across and shadow the land even more, making it darker, a luminescence shape begins to appear before them on the trail, moving towards them, floating upon the air. They are faced with a spirit. At that point, the spirit stares at them, and they are all, needless to say, scared at this point because they're confronted with a ghost, basically. But the spirit doesn't appear to be hostile in any way. And at that point, they all kind of look at the magic user for some answers here because he's the one that kind of specializes in this stuff with the arcane arts. And the magic user clears his throat and asks, "Do you mean us any harm?" The spirit, without its lips moving, but they can all hear the voice, tells them to be wary of their travels and be wary of the land, for that they have all been deceived and they are locked into a world of sorrow. The magic user at that point asked if the spirit would know the whereabouts of any mystical artifacts that may help them find their way back to their world. The spirit focuses its darkened eyes upon the magic user and answers, "Abandon all hope from these lands, for that you are cursed and you are doomed, and you may never leave this realm. Run now, for save your life, or become a permanent specter of the field like I have." And after the spirit says that, the luminescence begins to slowly fade out and the presence vanishes into the clear into the thick fog bank. And as dark clouds pass and the light begins to emerge across the landscape once again, the spirit has vanished. And all the characters are left with more questions than answers. God, I love this module so much. It's just, oh man. I think I've said this before in a lot of my videos. This is just one of my favorite modules of all time here. So, trying to evaluate and make sense of what just happened. Um, the warrior Carrion at that point demands that they move forward and try to make it to the castle before sundown, because by this time it's mid-afternoon. From what they can tell, the sun or the suns are the highest point in the sky, and it is time to move along. So, as the trail continues on, and after a short amount of time, they begin to get the strange feeling again, the hair standing on end, and the intensity of being watched but not seeing anything in their immediate vicinity. To their surprise, two luminescent orbs at that point begin to float out of the thick, heavy gray fog, and as they materialize, to their horror, they can see two specters moving towards them with weapons. They let out a blood-curdling type of scream that makes them all very unsettled. At that point, the warrior does what comes natural to him, and that is just swing and ask questions later. So let's hope this goes his way. Oh, an 8. Another 8. That's 16. A 7. Holy cow. Dice keeps exploding. Well, to his surprise, maybe it was an adrenaline high, maybe it was his battle cry that he let out. But as he swings his sword and it comes through, it at that point goes through the specter. The specter lets out a mournful, low cry, I guess you would say. And the specter at that point begins to distort, turns into a luminescent orb, and at that point vanishes off into the thick cloud banks. The second specter looks very, very upset and not too happy at what it's just saw. The elf at that point, Zenharia, decides to cast a fire arrow spell, draws his bow, and at that point will try to attack this thing. Ooh. So he releases the arrow, and as the arrow goes past the warrior Carrion, and the flame goes, it passes straight through the specter without any effect whatsoever, and the arrow at that point winks out farther into the distance beyond their sight in the thick, heavy fog. The cleric at that point, well, let me see if his god will listen. Let's roll a percentage dice to see if this spell will work. 96. Yes, his god hears him as he casts out a spell of Divine Shield, what gives him +3 to his defense against all undead and evil. The magic user at that point releases his magic missile spell at the specter before it gets its chance to attack. Let's hope it goes well. Ooh, 7 explodes. 6, hey, I'll take it. And additional. The wizard at that point motions his hand and speaks out an arcanic language as a form of magic appears from his hand in the shape of an arrow. Blue luminescent arrow that at that point speeds towards the specter. As it hits the specter cries out and winks to a small orb at that point that moves off into the thick fog banks and disappears. All right. Definitely getting closer to the Castle Ravenloft. As the characters move through the landscape, unknown what to expect next, and the trail at that point, from what they can tell, ends into a fork, like so. So, let's keep this kind of interesting. So, for those of you watching out there, should we take the trail to the right or should we take the trail to the left? All right. Well, let's leave it up to the dice to decide then, shall we? So if I roll high, I will go to the left. If I roll low, I will go to the right. We rolled low. To the right we shall go. As the adventurers decide to take the fork in the road to the right, suddenly the road splits into the forbidding Slavic woods. The northern fork slants up slightly to the north, while the southern fork slants slightly downward. Dense fog obscures your vision. A cold autumn wind whistles down the northern lane, cutting icily through your clothing. Dead brown leaves rush about. There is no sound other than the wind and the leaves. So let's roll as we pass through the path we decided to take. Uh-oh. And as we move into the Slavic woods once again, and of course we're surrounded by thick, heavy, dark forests, and we can see as the trail loops through, we can hear the sound of movement, the of footsteps breaking twigs and branches in the undergrowth of the woods. My adventurers at that point begin to survey their situation. My magic user, Vizanti, decides to cast his levitating orb spell, and then using his skill, continuous light, illuminates their orb of light. As the orb at that point grows brighter and brighter, illuminating this area, and their eyes begin to adjust. To their horror, what they can see in the darkened shadows of the trees and the thick rolling fog and the wind, they can see the silhouettes of zombies moving towards them. The warrior at that point wastes no time. He steps up to defend his party and swings at the first closest zombie to him. Ooh. And with that, at that point, the sword takes the head right off the zombie's shoulders, and it slumps to the forest floor. The other zombies advance forward towards the rest of the party. The elf, with an arrow already knocked and ready, releases and fires at the closest zombie in his range. The arrow at that point finds its mark, and the arrow tip cracks through the skull of the zombie. It falls lifeless to the forest floor. At that point, the third zombie moves in towards the cleric. But the good thing about him is he has a +3 to his defense against undead and evil. So, using his mace, he's going to swing and try to kill this zombie. And actually, that was an 8, so it explodes. I get to roll again, which is 6. Hey, I'm going to take that. His mace at that point cuts through the thick, foggy autumn air and splits the zombie's skull. And its lifeless body at that point falls into the road in which they're traveling through. The warrior Carrion tells everybody to be prepared and be ready for anything. He fears the closer they get to their destination point, the harder it's going to be. Alright. So they continue down the path. As they get to the edge of the Slavic woods, and it's growing into late afternoon, let's see what horrible, evil, nasty encounters await them. They hear shuffling in the roadway, and as thick fog banks move through, they ready their weapons, and they see from the illumination of their light, as far as they can see, at that point, darkened silhouettes that begin to move towards them. The warrior Carrion, his heart beats rapidly as he grips his sword even tighter, waiting for another zombie to come through the fog and strike it down. To his surprise, out of the thick fog banks, 3 villagers appear. He at that point lowers his sword and is surprised to what he sees and wishes them, good tidings. Hello, how are you? At that point, the villagers eye the adventurers suspiciously and wish them well. They more or less are trying to, how do I put this, keep their interaction with the adventurers as quick as possible and just pass upon their ways. Let's see what they have going on here. I'm rolling on a random chart for NPCs here to make it a little bit more interesting. So as they pass through, they notice Visanti here, and they briefly nod at him and give him a hand gesture. Visanti quickly notices that and recognizes it, and it's a sacred arcanic sign that you learn in schools of magic. He returns the sign and nods at them, and the NPC that is in the in the I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time talking. The NPC that's the first one leading the little caravan of them here tells him that he should be wary and be very careful of the dangers that lurk in these areas. At that point, he asked him, he says, "Brother, how did you go about coming to these lands?" And Visanti, at that point, squints his eyes and asks him, "I could ask you the same question. How is it that you came about these lands?" At that point, the NPC takes a deep breath and he looks back at his comrades and tells them, we were part of a school of magic. We were quickly overrun by large hordes of ferocious, horrible beasts, half dog, half man, yapping voices, green glaring eyes, and they attacked the school. We were, at that point, quickly outnumbered. Even though we had our magic, something more powerful was controlling these beasts, and we quickly became prisoners. After that, we were taken, and as we thought we would ultimately be eaten or sold, we were at that point led through a stone portal. When we came out, we found ourselves here, and we are searching far and wide to find the rest of our brothers, and hopefully together and collectively we can at that point find the portal to return us to our realm. Visanti takes all of this in, and he's thinking to himself whether he should divulge any information about their current quest or keep it to himself, because after all, they may want to take the artifact from them for themselves. It's at that point that Visanti quickly asks him, he says, "What is your name, brother?" And he tells him, "I am Vincent. Vincent Amherst." And he says, "Well met, Vincent, and good luck on your travels." He says, "If I come across any of your other brethren, I certainly will tell them that I ran across you here and send them in your direction." It's at that point, as the rest of the party members watch, and they don't understand the weird hand signals, and they both give themselves archaic hand signals that only a student of magic will understand. Even the elf, being that the elf knows elfish magic but not the high arcane arts, he understands a small degree of it, but to him in the human mind it's more like a little boys club, a blood pact, more than what he would consider being the true mystical high arts. And at that point, they vanish into the thick clouds of the Slavic woods. The adventurers, particularly the warrior, looks at him, and Tyrion's like, "What was that all about?" And Visitani, as he looks over his shoulder, making sure that they're far enough out of ear reach, tells them, "Well, by telling them our current quest, they may want to use it against our advantage. They may let us go and get the artifact, and then at that point kill us to take it, to get them back to their own world." He says, "In the world of magic, not is all as to what it seems. And anything and everything could be an illusion." He says, "I think it's best if we keep it to ourselves. And even though how selfish it may seem, we press on and get ourselves home and let them worry about their own endeavors." And by the sounds of things, if their story was right and true what they were explaining about these creatures, I've heard them, the aberrations created out of magic, half dog, half man, more than likely the world that they know, or the part of it that they know, has been overrun, enslaved, and or killed. So there's probably not much for them to return to anyways. So Visanti says, "With that, I think we spent enough time here, and perhaps we'd be safer moving on." Agreed, the adventurers move forward, keep continuing down the trail into the wind and the thick, thick fog. Once they clear the Slavic woods and the trail open up again, and it's getting towards evening at this point, the ground seems to become a little drier, and they notice the sound of, at that point, dry leaves beneath their feet rather than the mud that they've been walking through. And it almost becomes, at that point, gravelly. As they emerge from the fog, they smell the inviting aroma of a campfire, and they hear the sounds of laughter and a strange wind instrument playing and singing very, very closely in a dialect that they remember from Barovia. It is at that point that they come into a campsite. The canopy of mist and branches overhead suddenly gives way to black clouds boiling far above. There is a clearing here. Dry, brittle grass rustles in the biting wind. On the far side of the clearing are several colorful wagons parked on the banks of a pool. The mournful strains of an accordion mix meekly with the moaning of the wind. Several brightly clad figures surround a large roaring fire. The road seems to pass close by this camp. There are 10 people that surround this campfire. They are at that point um, invited in and more or less encouraged to join them at the campfire. As they decide suspiciously to join them, because after all, what they know about this land that they're in so far is that it is very hostile. There are quite a bit of horrors and dangers out here just waiting to kill them. So, for the fact that there's a camp out here, they're not armed, they're just sitting and enjoying this cold, windy place at this point. They find that a little bit odd, but nevertheless, being invited to a nice warm campfire, being that their clothing is damp and cold and their feet are wet and cold from walking through mud and mist, they do decide to join them at the fire and warm themselves. Visanti does say there is always safety in numbers, and maybe we would do well to spend the evening here and continue our adventures later in the morning. They accept their offer and at that point join them at the campfire. Let's see what our newfound friends have to offer us here. I gotta grab me another dice. Hmm. At that point, um these people which they have just met and seem to be hospitable to them. They are very, at that point, very dominant and sure of their safety in this area, and tell them you are safe here for the evening and there's no worry. You can sheathe your weapons and you can rest here. Nothing will harm you. They seem to have quite a bit of tradition and a very rich cultural background compared to what the people that they have met in Barovia that are very saddened, very suspicious of new people, and just overall uninviting. I'm just checking the messages here again. Hold your breath. How are you doing? Hold your breath. Welcome in. So, it is at that point, as they talk, they learn a word. And that word is, they call themselves, we are the gypsies. And we have no qualm with the land's ruler. He lives high in the castle. He's not to be afraid. He is a man of great power. The Count Zarovich. He may have the answers in which you seek. It's at that point that the gypsies share some food and some water with them. And as the evening moves on from where they are at, in the distance off here in the woods, as the evening at that point sets in and it gets darker, they see luminescent blurs that look like they're moving through the distance. The adventurers notice, and the gypsies tell them, pay no attention to what you see there, and do not seek it, for it'll be your undoing. Pay no attention. You are but safe here. It's at that point that one of the gypsies get me out some more tables here. Let me generate a name here. I love my random tables. One of the gypsies, Ed Werninda, who has been quite hospitable to us at this point, she encourages us and she says, really, who you should talk to and who may help at that point answer the questions that you seek. You should talk to the Madame Eva. She is but a way up the trail from here in another tent. You will be safe in your travels, and you have no worries for that. Nothing will attack you so long as you are with us. The adventurers look amongst themselves, and Visanti, let's see how he wants to react to this. His probability. You use the 50%. So if it's higher than a 50%, high probability of suspicion. If it's below 50%, you can have a low probability of suspicion. 21. Visanti feels pretty confident in Edwina, and at that point convinces his comrades and says, maybe we should go and hear what she has to say. Edwina at that point claps her hands and says, excellent, excellent. Follow me and I will lead you to the way. At that point, Edwina picks up a torch, lights it off the fire to illuminate their way, and they follow the trail. A slow walk through the ever-piercing darkness and the wind as her torch flickers against the wind in the fire, dances, giving off bizarre shadows, almost looking like things are leaping, dancing, and rolling in the tall grass. As they wind a short curve in the darkness, they see another fire and a tent. Edwina walks up to the tent and at that point pulls back the cover and motions for them to enter. One by one, they enter the tent. Within, all is dimly illuminated in pools of red light. A small, low table stands across from the doorway. Covered in a black velvet cloth, glints light seems to flash from a crystal ball on the table. As a hunched figure peers into its depths, she speaks, her voice crackles like dry weeds. Her tone soars and falls like the wind outside. At last, you have arrived. Her sudden cackling laughter bursts like mad lightning from her withered lips. As the adventurers eye one another and press a little further into the tent, Madame Eva says, please sit down. Let me read you your fortune. She stares into the crystal ball. As she looks, she says, I see much pain and death in your future. For that, this is the reason why you came here. The reason why you were brought here is to pay for the evils that you have at that point imposed on others in your life. At this point, moving forward in the game, all the characters suffer a -1 to their rolls. She at that point peers back into the ball again. She says, here in this land, you're undoing to be able to wrong the rights that you have brought upon the others is by locating a weapon. The one of you carries a weapon that is stronger than all others against the evil in this land. A mighty sword. But there is one part missing from his sword. The part is found in the evil one's lair. The place in which you are heading to. I believe I've been waiting for you to arrive. The adventurers all look about themselves, confused, wondering how she would know where they are headed, why they are headed there. She, at that point, tells them, "You are seeking your way back home. You are stuck here, cut off. And as I said, the evils that you have imposed on others have brought you here to pay for what you have done. There is no turning back at this point. Unfortunately, you have to move forward. And in doing so, you must sacrifice greatly. But by sacrificing greatly, it shall pay off, and you shall be returned back to your homes safely." It's at that point she looks at the cleric and she says, "I noticed you are hurt. Let me heal you. Let me help." It's at that point she casts a heal spell upon the cleric. Although he can sense, and let's see if his god will say divine knowledge. He has a sense that Madame Eva is not what she appears to be, but he also knows in the back of his mind that she can't be entirely 100% evil if she can cure wounds. Madame Eva at that point says, "You must venture to the evil ones later. You know what I speak. It is the place high up upon the hill. It is that point the evil one resides in the Count Zarovich's dwelling, oppressing the Count. The Count would be so gracious if you were to help him rid his kingdom of this evil, lifting the blight upon this land, and at that point redeeming yourself for the evils that you have done." Madame Eva at that point motions that her reading with them at this point is done, and perhaps they should return to the camp for the night and rest for their journey to come. As they exit the tent, Edwina is standing out there with her torch, staring almost emotionless off into the darkness with a grin on her face. Quickly, she shakes it off and looks over at them, and she says, I see the Madame Eva has given you your future. Follow me and I will take you back to the camp, to where you can rest for the night. And at that point, you will be safe and free of your weary for the evening. As they walk back into the cold darkness, the wind at that point engulfs them. And as they reemerge from the heavy, thick clouds of fog, they can see the bright glow of the campfire. They return to the camp and sit by the warm fire, warming themselves. At that point, the gypsies serve them ale, and they explain to them that it has a unique herb added to it that'll raise their spirits and warm their hearts. As they drink the ale, they begin to feel very relaxed, very, very comfortable. As they look at the fire seems to dance and flicker and invites them. At that point, they get lost watching the fire and quietly, one by one, fall into a deep, deep sleep. As they awaken in the morning, cold, rested but cold and wet, and they look around, they notice that the encampment at this point is empty. The carts are gone, the gypsies are gone, the fire has long but died out to be reduced to a few small embers, and the over stifling smell of smoldering wood. It is at this point that they decide to press on. They gather their things, and just as confused as when they met the gypsies and many other things in this land, they're left with more answers than questions. I'm sorry, they're left with more questions than answers. Oh man. Okay. Welcome in, Fernando Q and Shilkith. That's awesome. Yeah, you should try it. It's very, very, very cool. All right. They venture out into the unforbidding and unforgiving landscapes of Ravenloft again. As they head up the trail, they come past the campsite to where Madame Eva's tent was, and just like the campsite as to where they were at, nothing is left but the remains of a small smoldering embers of fire and the smell of a campfire. At least at this point they know that the reading was real and what happened was in fact real. They continue on past the camp. As the trail winds around the Slavic woods at that point, over shadows, the darkness of the wood, always at that point menacing them. And off in the distance, they can hear the sound of running water, and they can see a river off into this area. At that point, I think they're going to deviate from the trail, walk across the thick grass and over to the water to get themselves some water and replenish from the alcohol that they had drank last night. Their heads pound a bit from the weird concoction that they were given to drink. At that point, they come to the river's edge, and the cool, clear water, they reach in and they drink, and it quenches their thirst and relieves that nagging, burning sensation in the back of their sinuses and their throat. The cleric once again empties out the vial of water that he got earlier when he tried to make holy water, and dips it into the river, pulls it up, and offers up a prayer. Let's see if his God will listen. 69, that works. At that point, his prayer is heard and answered, and he now again has a vial of holy water. They return to the trail and begin heading towards their destination. As the trail ends, they come to the bottom of a large waterfall. There's really nothing of interest but roaring water over rocks and mist. And then a stone bridge can be seen nearly 1,000 feet overhead that crosses over the falls and continues towards their destination point. They at that point begin to transverse the dry cliff face of the weeds and venture up and intersect onto another well-worn path road. And at this point, by late morning, they have finally begin to cross the bridge. And as they walk across the stone bridge that reaches 1,000 feet into the air, they look down, and the river below them looks but a small, small little stream. So they're here like, holy crap. They walk across the stone bridge, and at this point they look out across the landscape, and they get a better sight of the castle. and they can see the columns at that point and the towers that pierce into the thick gray clouds high above them. They can hear the rumble of thunder, and they see streaks of lightning at that point dance off the clouds around the castle. As they cross the other side of the bridge, they pick back up onto a very well worn path. And they continue towards their destination point. Unlike the Slavic woods in which they went through, there are more smaller, patchier areas of forest, some very thick, which they can see that blot the landscape, but a lot which are open. They hear the howl of wolves, and from the thick fog, they see once again a pack moving towards them, ferociously and unrelenting. Carrion the warrior unsheathes his sword and then swings wildly at the first one in the pack. So if you remember with Madame Eva's prediction, they have a -1 to the rolls, which takes them to a 2, which is going to be the turning point in this adventure here. He swings and he wounds the animal, but he does not kill it. And the wolf at that point lowers its eyes, bares its large, razor sharp teeth, and its face begins to contort as it barks and growls, and drool drips from its fangs, and the wild look in its eyes. At that point, Carrion the warrior feels a quick moment of fear streak through him that he may be attacked. The elf at that point, without having his bow ready, draws his scimitar and swings at the second wolf. He rolls a 1, -1 at that point. He misses the wolf. The wolf dodges the attack. Its fur bunches up behind its neck as the wolf takes a different stance. The next wolf at that point, drawing closer to the cleric. The cleric takes his mace and then swings towards the animal to defend himself. Ooh, a 7. But it's actually -1 will be a 6. The mace at that point does hit the animal, and the sound of crushing bone. The animal at that point uh, cries out a large yelping pain and begins to retreat slightly, but looks back at the cleric with a very crazed look in its eyes, baring its teeth. And unfortunately, now it's the wolves' turn. Oh boy. The wolf, the first one by Carrion, my adventurer, leaps towards him. The full brutal weight of this animal collides with him, and at that point, knocking him off guard to the ground as he struggles with this animal, tearing and flesh from him. And he's going to take 8 points of damage for that. Oh, let me see. Same thing with the elf. Let's see what happens to him. At that point, the wolf quickly overpowers the elf, and his massive jaw and his teeth sink into the elf's neck, and the animal begins to, at that point, rip its head from left to right vigorously. The elf tries to free itself, and blood begins to spurt forth. Now, let's hope the cleric does better. Ooh. The cleric is quickly overcome by the wolf as it gnashes and tears at the flesh. The cleric does everything he can do to stand his ground and remain on his feet from being drug under by this rabid animal. The wizard Visanti, seeing all this horror on just unveil before his eyes, he casts fireball upon this wolf right here that has got the elf trapped to the ground and quickly killing him. Ooh. His spell at that point, something goes wrong. Perhaps it's the horror of everything he sees going on. Perhaps it's from the intoxicating drink that the gypsies gave him. Who knows? But he forgets a vital step in the spell, and at that point, the spell does not go off, and he stands there helplessly, watching as his friend is devoured by the beast. Carrion, the warrior, at that point, at that point, musters enough strength to kick the animal away from him. And with the sword, he is able to kick the animal and take the sword in one quick thrust into the chest of the thing, killing it. He scrambles to get to his feet to assist his friend. But it is at that point he notices that his friend's eyes are lifeless, and the wolf is tearing flesh from his neck cavity and gulping down flesh as quickly as he can eat it. The cleric is going to try to defend himself at this point. He takes the mace with the wolf at that point biting at his leg and tearing flesh, and comes down with the mace, cracking it over its skull and killing the animal. And with all the strength and just searing pain, he kicks the animal from him and it slumps over dead off the side of the trail. Visanti at this point is going to try to cast a fireball at this animal. At this point, magic emits from his hand, and as it comes out, a large ball of fire begins to materialize and quickly finds its mark. It hits the animal, and its fur erupts into flames as the wolf cries out and is in immense pain. It runs quickly away from the elf's corpse and retreats quickly back into the dense fog banks. They are quickly overcome with, at this point, sadness, anger, and confusion because they have just lost one of their comrades. The smell of burnt fur hangs heavy in the air and of blood from their comrade. The cleric at that point staggers up to the elf and assesses his wounds, and he looks up at Carrion the warrior and he says, "There's nothing we can do for him. He is gone. We can try to give him a proper burial." They spend the next 3 hours at that point locating stones and large underbrush and what they can find to make a makeshift burial mound to bury their fallen comrade at that point. Carrion the warrior at that takes his weapons so they can be at that point returned to his loved ones upon their return to the prime material plane. He also takes the potion of healing that he had on him, breaks the seal, pops the cork, and drinks it with sadness upon his face, wishing his comrade was still here to be able to do the same. It's at this point that the sun begins to hang low in the sky. It's past midday at this point and growing towards afternoon. Carrion looks at the remaining party members and tells them we have to complete this. We have to complete this now. If not for ourselves, but for Zanhera and for everything that he's given for us. Fontaine the cleric cast blessing upon himself to cure his wounds. They now at this point, with sadness in their heart, move away from the area of their fallen comrade. The only thing left, a makeshift burial mound with bloodstains on the roadway. After what seems like an hour or more of travel, they once again hear the unforgiving sound of wolves in the distance. Carrion, full of anger, draws his sword, belts out a large battle cry scream, ready for whatever comes through the fog banks. Bursting forth out of the fog, another pack of wolves come bursting through. He swings at the first one he sees, screaming, fall beneath the blade. Oh, that's an 8. That's another 8. So that's a 23 at that point. He, in one swing of his sword at that point, just decapitates the wolf before it can even think about attacking him. The cleric swings his mace at the wolf. As the heavy mace comes down, it hits the skull of the animal, and a loud crunch noise is heard. The animal staggers and then falls lifeless to the ground. Its body shakes and quivers for a moment as it draws its last breath. Visanti, recalling his magic missile spell, readies it. As he holds up his hand, a field of magical energy at that point emerges, and the shape of pure magical energy of an arrow shoots out, hits the animal. The animal cries out in pain, and at that point looks at the other three, realizes it's outnumbered, turns and flees back into the dense fog banks. As they move ever forward, at that point, they come to yet another fork in the road. As they stand looking at the fork in the road, they can hear more wolves in the distance heading towards them. They can, as the wind howls behind them, and they can hear the sound of the dry grass being trampled by wolves that sound like they're circling them. As they continue down the track, the fog shrouded road, dead leaves crackling along your track, the road splits in two. The dirt road continues to the northwest, while a wide road leads east into the heart of the dense fog. Patches of cobblestone show up through the east road, telling that it was once a great road. To the right side of the fork stands a large carriage with two horses. Both horses are black as pitch. The horses snort violent puffs of steamy breath into the chilled air. The carriage door at that point swings open silently. The adventurers all look at themselves in a silent accord, almost like they all at that point agree their only way to escape this madness of certain death, of being torn apart by wolves, at that point is the carriage. They dart towards the carriage, and one by one, as they enter into it, the door closes shut behind them. They feel a quick jolt from the horses, and then at that point, the landscape begins to become a blur. The sound of the wolves begin to fade into the distance at that point, as the carriage begins to gain speed ever faster and faster. The sound of the horses' heavy hooves falling onto the cobblestone, and the sound of the wheels grinding away. As they look around, they notice they do not see anybody at this point controlling the carriage. Is what seems like an eternity riding through the countryside as the sun begins to wane for the evening, and the whole entire landscape is shrouded in dark, wispy pools of fog and mist. At that point, they can see in the distance some craggy peaks After passing through the craggy peaks, the road takes a sudden turn to the east, and the startling, awesome presence of Ravenloft itself towers before you. The carriage comes to a stop just in front of twin guardhouses of turreted stone, broken from years of use and exposure. Beyond these, a 50-foot wide parapet scraps between the Bellinnock cliffs and the walls of Ravenloft. A chasm of dizzying death depths that disappears into the fog shrouds distance far below. The lowering drawbridge of an old, shorn-up wood beams hangs precariously between you and the arched entrance to the courtyard. The chains of the drawbridge creak in the wind as their rust-eaten iron stained with the weight from atop the high, strong walls. Stone gargoyles seem to stare at you from their hollow sockets and grin hideously. A rotting wooden portcullis, green with growth, hangs in the entry tunnel. Beyond this, the main doors of Ravenloft stand open. A rich, warm light spills from them into the courtyard. Torches flutter sadly in sconces on both sides of the open doors. The door to the carriage opens, and at that point, the adventurers exit. They begin to walk on the soft, gravelly area over to the drawbridge, looking for somebody or something stirring. As they as they make their way across the loose gravel to the drawbridge, they begin one by one to cross, and at that point, they can hear the heavy chains as they jingle and adjust to the weight that's on them, the wood underneath their feet creaking. As they cross the bridge, at that point, this area of the bridge, the rotten wood gives out. Both Carrion and Fontaine, the cleric, fall, gripping onto what little they can grab. And the wet, moldy wood of the bridge as their hands begin to slip. Vizanti does what he can, offering them help and assistance to try to pull them back up to safety. As Vizanti looks beyond them, he can see jagged cliffs about 1,000 feet below them. as he is able to pull Carrion up to safety onto firm boards, you would say at that point again. He reaches over and he grabs Fontaine by the hand and assists him. At that point, they very carefully and skillfully cross the bridge into the tunnel, ever closer to the warm light that pours out from the open doors of Castle Ravenloft. As they enter the tunnel of Castle Ravenloft at that point, Carrion, I'm sorry. Yep, Carrion. He decides to unsheath the elven scimitar and hold it in one hand in the small tunnel. As he enters the tunnel, what appears to be mold begins to move ever closer to him and then slowly drips down. At that point, falling onto his armor, he can hear the sound of a sizzling noise at that point of the armor being eaten and etched away. Taking the sword, he quickly brushes the green, gooey slime material off of his armor, which quickly attaches itself to the sword and falls to the ground. He stands in amazement as he watches the sword of his fallen comrade slowly being dissolved and eaten. It's at that point that all of them, while this green slime is occupied by dissolving a elvish scimitar, that they all decide at that point to run through the tunnel into the courtyard. As they emerge from the tunnel into the courtyard of Castle Ravenloft, thick cold fog swirls around in the darkened courtyard. Sporadic flashes of lightning lance the angry clouds overhead. Thunder pounds the courtyard. A light drizzle begins to fall ahead. Torch flames flutter in the wind on each side of the keep's open main doors. Warm light spills from those open doors into the courtyard. Doors in the gate towers on each side of the tunnel entrance are shut against the rain. A howling wind rushes through the courtyard. The dark towers of the keep loom above the mist. Flickering lights shine from a short, round tower on the southeast side of the keep. As they rush towards the main entrance, they step up the stairway from the courtyard into the warm light of Castle Ravenloft. The ornate, massive doors hang open. Fluttering torches cast dim yellow flickers of light from the entryway. 20 feet into the castle, a second set of doors suddenly swings open effortlessly, and the sound of organ music flows out. Overhead in the entryway, 4 statues of dragons glare down, their eyes flickering in the torchlight. This is where it's going to get interesting. Alright, I'm going to take a quick break. I will be right back in a few minutes. Okay. As the adventurers enter this room and look at their strange new surroundings, let's set the scene, shall we? Okay. Let me get some minis here for this. Once inside the room and distracted by the sound of the sound of organ music, and the warm light that seems to be dizzying and intoxicating and inviting, they hear the sound of movement followed by three large booms on the floor around them. One by one, the statues come alive. Bearing down on them, three large dragons. Okay. At that point, Carrion is going to draw his sword. And, well, let's see how this goes. As he steps up to the closest dragon and swings his sword at it. The sword at that point glances off, and the dragon at that point repositions its head, opens up its mouth to bare its large, sharp teeth, and lets out a horrific howl. Fontaine the cleric is going to cast Divine Shield. Let's see if his god will grant him his spell. He's got to have above 50% here. 95, it goes through. He has Divine Blessing. Vizanti the wizard, looking at everything he sees going on here, at that point decides to cast Escape. And Escape is basically a way for him to teleport himself into a different area. And beyond here into the courtyard, let's see if it works. And boom. The adventurers hear a loud thunderclap as he vanishes and he reappears out here. But we'll deal with him in a moment, because I got something planned for him. The dragon that the warrior is facing at that point attacks. And this isn't going to be pretty. I will just be honest with you. This is not going to be pretty at all. Okay. Gets 3 attacks. Ugh. Well, it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. The first attack, its teeth sinks into his shoulder, crunching the armor. And then as the dragon rips his head back, the warrior Carrion screams out. The 2 claws he is able to, at that point, cower this attack and move out of the way of. This dragon, as he moves up onto the cleric, Fontaine. Ooh. As the dragon tries to attack him, an invisible force field of light at that point, the dragon finds it almost impenetrable. And every time it gets close, at that point, almost a large electrical discharge from the force field goes off, resisting the dragon. The other dragon moves in on him to attack. This other dragon finds the same thing, and the cleric is at that point guarded and encased inside of this orb of divine protection. As Visanti appears back outside into the courtyard, he hears a voice say, "Are you leaving so soon?" As he turns around, he sees a figure of a female approach him, carrying a weapon. Her eyes are as red as hot embers of a fire. And as she smiles, fangs, very sharp fangs, begin to grow from her teeth. She, at that point, moves in to attack the wizard. Before the wizard can even react, she appears to be here, then in a blur over here on the side. The next thing he feels is a very, very strong hand grip him by the back of the head and yank his head backwards, and then the very painful feeling of 2 fangs biting into his neck and sinking in. He feels his life's energy begin to wane from him, and his knees grow weak as everything begins to go dark. And at that point, slumps to the floor, or the courtyard, I'm sorry. Back to our adventures inside the castle. Carrion at that point goes to attack the dragon once again. Mm. And once again, his sword just glances off the beast. With him being encased in a orb of divine power, he's able to step up and swing his mace at this beast. Woo. 7. As he swings the mace and it cracks the head of this immense stone dragon, a chunk of it busts off and goes sliding across the room floor. The dragon at that point turns its head and its eyes fixate on him as he begins a flurry of attacks. Ooh. At that point, the dragon's teeth pierce the orb, and his arm is wounded in the attack. The second dragon at that point begins to attack and flank him from behind. Ugh. He also attacks and bites at his other arm. And then at that point, he's going to take 2 more points of damage. This dragon turns its head and then begins a flurry of attacks against Carrion. The dragon's mighty jaws come in, clamping down on him and crunching his armor, throwing him to the floor. 2 claws, claw, then another claw at him as his large reptilian foot comes down and slams to the floor, pinning him to the ground. At that point, the warrior looks up very wounded and weak at the dragon, completely at his mercy. Let's see if he can even break free from this thing. Oh, that's a 7. Hey. Another 7. He is able at that point to muster some strength and bust out of the dragon's grip of its foot. Turning around and bringing its sword down, he at that point cuts through the stone leg of the beast as it explodes and falls to pieces on the floor. The dragon at that point cries out in a howling, loud roar. The cleric is going to try another attack on this dragon. Ooh, he rolled an 8. At that point, the blunt mace hits the head of the dragon again, busting off more pieces of the stone as it, at that point, falls away to the floor. The dragon goes in for its next attack against the wizard as it stands, not the wizard, the warrior, as he stands there weak, severely wounded, and clinging to life. And I think before this actually goes down, I'm gonna take his last potion of healing. As he gulps down the potion and he begins to feel some of the pain and his wounds begin to heal, suddenly and quickly he is attacked relentlessly again and begins to lose more blood, but is able to stumble at least far enough out of reach of the dragon's attack for now. And the poor cleric. So, let's see how this is going to go. Well, it's better than I thought. As the dragon at that point bears its sharp teeth down upon the orb, there is a quick and brief moment of what looks like an electrical discharge, and then at that point the orb fades out. The dragon relinquishes its head, and its two claws as it stands on its hind legs come down and rip right into the cleric. And unfortunately, the cleric at that point is face down on the floor, crushed beneath the weight of the stone dragon. The warrior stumbles, trying to ready himself for the next attack, steps in and swings once more at the dragon. -1, 3. Which his blade at that point just glances off the stone dragon. At that point, the stone dragon returns his attack. The dragon's sharp teeth at that point quickly sink into the warrior. Sharp pain fills his body as the two claws reach out and grip him, tearing him underneath the weight of the dragon and then crushing him on the floor. Everything goes dark in the warrior and the cleric's mind. They find themselves back at the cemetery in Barovia, along with countless hundreds of other adventurers like themselves. As they make the long walk from Barovia through the trail But at this time, they are not hindered or held back from wolves or zombies or any of the other horrors. As they pass the gypsies once again, and they notice they are those streaking luminescent lights that they saw a few nights ago, they make their way yet back to Castle Ravenloft. And at that point, as they climb towards the castle, they find themselves in a horrible, relentless loop as a specter, just like many and many of countless hundreds of adventurers before them, looking to finish their quest, but never finishing it, haunting Ravenloft forever and ever until the next set of unknowing and unweary adventurers enter the realm of Ravenloft. Alright guys, that's going to conclude the video. At that point, all the characters are dead. I'm surprised, really, we made it as far as we did. If you like my video, give me a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please feel free to subscribe and hit the bell icon, and you will be notified when I upload new videos. But at this point, thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and I will catch you later. Look forward to more videos in the future. And this was, if you're not aware, what I was playing was 4 Against Darkness, and this will take you from level 5 to 9. And I had converted it to play the original Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 1st edition Ravenloft. Thanks a lot, guys.